If you aren't going longer, you're not training endurance. Endurance is not a pace, it's not a zone, and it certainly isn't a finish line. Endurance is how long you can keep going. Very little of what we call endurance training is actually training that. I just finished 12 weeks of my own endurance program on heavy meta. I have zero data proving it worked, no pace improvement. I can't point to a threshold test or a VO2 number. What I have is that I run and ride a lot longer than I did in May, and I still want to, which I'm going to argue is the only test that matters. So let me explain why, and then I'll tell you about the night that 3 of us rode 575 miles on an assault bike and only 1 of us came back. Last week, one of our best clients, Derek, asked me a question. Derek and I have been going back and forth on endurance for a long time. We are both zone 2 cronies. We both have over a decade in it. We have both done the thing where you build a gigantic aerobic engine and then had to figure out how to keep it alive while also keeping strength and speed and power, mobility, and even sports skill specifically. Neither of us gets to specialize. If all I needed was endurance, the answer would be obvious and kind of dumb. Go long, go slow, go home. We were comparing mistakes. 2 chronic overworkers trading notes, and then he asked me, knowing what you know now, what would you have changed about how you prepared for bike racing? I had an answer. I just didn't like it, but that doesn't mean anything without the definition, so let's do that first. The root of the word durus means hard. It's the same foundation that gives you durable and duration. Endurance is the hardening that lets something last. It is about time, how long, not how fast. Most endurance events you've ever heard of are speed tests. Marathons, Ironmans, centuries, ultras. The winner is the fastest. The distance is fixed. The clock is the variable. Nobody wins a marathon by lasting the longest. They win it by finishing first. The irony is that in most modern endurance competitions, the last place is the most enduring. That doesn't mean they aren't useful or they're not worth doing. It just means it incentivizes us to aim for the wrong thing. Because when the test is speed, the training gets built backward from speed. You pick an arbitrary distance and an intensity that optimizes for that distance, and you train that intensity. You're training capacity, a specific one. You're getting good at going a fixed distance as fast as possible, and for many people, this defeats the point. A true endurance test would be the other axis. Fix the intensity, make the time the variable. How long can you keep going before you can't? And to be fair, there are some events that model this, but most people have never trained that. Almost all of us have never even tested it, and that's probably for good reason. Endurance reflects strength in one specific way. There is a boundary. In strength, it's the maximum. In endurance, it's the point where you can't continue. And in both, the way you expand the boundary is by getting near it, repeatedly, getting familiar with it, getting comfortable, standing close to the edge. What you don't do is cross it. In endurance training, the modern approach goes a few different ways. The first type understands that they need more aerobic output, so they just do more of everything at all intensities, which works for a little bit, but the pace is too high to expand too much because fatigue builds before fitness adapts, which is what most of us call overtraining. Another type tries to get the exact right intensity so they don't have to do as much. We call it the optimal training zone. It gets promoted as the answer, and everything that is not it is junk mileage or a gray area. It isn't that any of these are the wrong answer. If I was racing an event with a known distance, they would be the right answer. But the question, whether you can endure, does not end when the event ends. In some cases, that's when the questions begin. Here's where I'll tell you a personal story, and I'm going to throw my friends Keegan and Roger a little bit under the bus, so sorry guys. In 2020, I got an email from Adam. Adam owns Movement Labs in central London. He'd found or come up with a 24-hour assault bike challenge. It's teams of 3 for 24 hours, continuous, one rider on the bike at all times. The most mileage wins. I don't remember if he had done it or he was thinking about it, but he sent it to me for obvious reasons. I looked at it and thought, that's disgusting. So I forwarded it to Keegan because I assumed Keegan would have the sense to probably shoot it down. Keegan had worse sense than I did. He said we should do it. So we set it for New Year's Eve in 2020, and that's how the space race became a tradition. We only had like 4 or 5 weeks to prepare. Roger became our third person. We immediately started talking strategy and pacing and splits. We were also super concerned with what kind of snacks we were going to use. There was not enough time to build a proper base, so mostly we were just getting used to sitting on that god-awful seat that's on the assault bike and using whatever fitness that we had to do it. I think the longest session I did in the previous 2 years was less than 2 hours. But 10 years of triathlon and bike racing had taught me that in anything long, contact points are the limiting factor: hands, feet, and ass. So I planned for shoes, shorts, sock changes. My real worry was cadence though. The assault bike turns at roughly half the RPM of a real bike for the same wattage. If you've ever raced bikes and overdone your SFR work, that slow frequency repetitions, it's a big gear in a low cadence up a steep hill. And you know exactly what this does to your knees. Now, just do that for 24 hours. We didn't know how to split the work. My first plan was 20 minutes on, like 40 minutes off. Then we talked to a few people who had set records at the Race Across America. The Team Ram riders don't do long pulls. They rotate short. The pull is short enough that you never leave the top of your output, and the rest is long enough that you actually recover. Their advice to us was as short as you possibly can. And that's where Keegan started talking about sustaining more than a 450 watt pace. 450 watts is possible. I heard it and I didn't argue with whether we could do it or not, but I wasn't weighing it against just the event. I was weighing it against my entire life. And this is the thing that I think most people get wrong. There is a difference between an endurance event, which ends, and endurance as a trait, which is the ability to keep going. The event has a finish line. The trait doesn't. And the mistake is thinking that getting good at the event builds that trait. Very often, though, it destroys it. I've watched this up close and personal for the last 20 years. Endurance junkies, they can talk for hours about how to finish an objective, how to be the best in the world at a known time domain. And almost none of them save enough of themselves to keep doing the thing they're trying to win at. They finish and the bill comes, and the bill is always bigger than they bargained for. So after they finish a career or whatever, 6 months later, a year later, they're not training. 2 years later, they're doing something else entirely, and they tell you that they just got burned out. But they didn't get burned out. They crossed a line that doesn't come with a warning sign, and they're paying for it. So Keegan's pace did not account for the fact that I want to ride a bike. I want to run. I want to move and to go further next week and in the next 20 years. That's the trait. So back to my answer to Derek. I would not have made myself hate bike racing. That's the answer that I didn't like. The one that made me recognize that I too had miscalculated endurance. Instead of training to win races rather than to keep going, I went way too deep for no reason. I wasn't trying to go further. I was trying to prove I could beat other people. And in proving it, I couldn't outlast myself. I couldn't outthink my own stupidity. I measured my endurance in speed compared to another person. I never measured it in persistence. So here's what that looked like. I built the biggest Zone 2 engine I could build and pointed all of it at competition. I was time trialing in the 400 watt range. I held 305 watts for 3 hours in a race, and I tricked myself into thinking these measurements of speed and performance were endurance, because I was doing a lot of it. I was spending 27 hours on a bike on average, the majority of which was Zone 2 because I didn't want to accumulate junk miles. That's not even counting gym work, which also included plenty of pedaling. I would do 70 plus races a season. I rode a bike so far that I crossed the threshold where I stopped enjoying riding a bike. And I don't think I've come back from that since. Years later, I can ride, and I do, but something that was mine got spent, and I spent it on podiums nobody remembers, including me. What I do remember that I enjoy is that learning to go long took me to places in the world that most people haven't seen. Mountaintops in Europe, rural country in Africa. I got to see those by accident preparing for races. And at least for me on a bike, that probably won't happen again. So that is, by definition, not having endurance. I could go fast. I just couldn't keep going. Keegan, Roger, and I rode 575 miles in 24 hours. As far as I know, to this day, it's still a world record. The team averaged just under 400 watts, which was dragged down by my 350. We tried different splits early. What we ended up doing for the last 14 hours was 60 seconds on, 2 minutes off. The RAM guys were right. Short enough to stay at the top of our output, but long enough that recovery actually happened. And we just did that over and over and over again. The next morning, I woke up sore. My knees and elbows were absolutely annihilated, but I wanted to move. Within a few days, I was back on the bike and I was back to training. Keegan took a little bit longer, weeks and months. I'm not actually sure, at least by motivation, but it killed something in him. Roger, who brought his own assault bike to the gym for the event, never came back. We still have his assault bike. So I won't say that that was all due to one night for him, but it certainly contributed. The event didn't build endurance in any of us. It just tested whether we already had it. And the result had nothing to do with wattage. So we can look at research and argue like what is the best way, like Steven Saylor's 80-20 method or something like that. But I think that only works if we have a designated format, like a limited and finite game that has arbitrary rules. Everyone remembers the tortoise and the hare, but before you think I'm going to make the same moral equivalent about slow and steady versus fast and talented, I'm not. The fable is wrong, and it's the exact reason measuring either of those as the answer doesn't help us with real endurance. There is no finish line. Intensity is the inverse to duration. There's no answer to how to keep going. There is no designated optimal pace to life. So in my own endurance program, I listed MAF as the method for tracking aerobic efficiency. But I'm pretty close to pulling it out completely, not because it's wrong. Maffetone's basic idea that you can build the aerobic system by staying under a low ceiling for a long time is correct, and it's what the whole program is based on. But I'm considering pulling it because MAF still designates a speed. It gives you a heart rate, and then it tells you to watch your pace. And it kind of insinuates that you can get away with something if you do this. It optimizes. And the moment there's a pace to watch, people start chasing it. They start trying to make the number go up. And now the session is about the number other than the duration. So I'm leaving MAF in there because effectively you can use it to accurately judge increasing distance, as long as you are aware of the trap of becoming like enamored with the intensity of it. The biggest difference isn't in any new method or idea other than treating endurance like what it is defined by. How this translates to actually developing endurance is just conceptual. The principle is in training to go longer. That is different for everyone at every level, but the rules are pretty simple. Go out at whatever pace you think you can hold for a quote-unquote long time. At each point, halfway, three-quarter, or coming near completion, ask yourself if you can double the distance without changing the pace. If the answer is yes, you're not touching the boundary. Go further. If the answer is no, ask yourself if you pick too hard of a pace. If the answer is no, you're training endurance. If the answer is yes, slow down and go further. I want the session to be about time. If going longer means slowing down, that's endurance. If it means speeding up to get it over with, that is not endurance. That's the finish line reflex. That's the thing you're supposed to be unlearning through building the capacity to go further. When I say go further and don't worry about it, I mean don't worry about it. Don't worry about the pace. Don't worry about the zone. Worry about whether you'll want to do it again tomorrow. Optimal is whatever keeps you going. People ask, what's optimal? Optimal zone, optimal duration, optimal split. Optimal has nothing to do with the zone. Optimal is whatever it takes to keep going. That's not motivational bullshit. It's a definition. Endurance is duration. The optimal endurance training is the one that produces the most duration, not this session or for an event, over your lifetime. The day you quit enduring is the day you die. I mean that literally. You are enduring right now. You've been doing it since you were born. Breathing is an endurance event with no finish line. Every system in your body is a system for lasting. And at some point, you stop lasting, and that's it. Everything between here and there is endurance training. You either do it in a way that lets you keep going, or you do it in a way that gets you to some line faster. And there is no line to get to faster at the end of this. So even on my own program, 12 weeks later, I have no numbers. I do feel better. I run and ride for a lot longer than I did in May. I couldn't tell you the pace. I couldn't tell you if it's better or worse than it was, but I do enjoy it. And that means I'll keep going. And that is the test. That is always been the test.